What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for an episode of Gunfighter Life. The podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, use of force, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. What are we going to talk about today? Do you like apple pie? Do you like muscle cars? Do you like... I almost said puppies, but who doesn't like puppies? You like freedom? Are you a red-blooded American male? Then chances are you probably like lever actions. Who doesn't like lever actions? There are probably the people out there that are like, ugh, get that lever action away from my super cool AR-15. Don't even let it touch it. Don't even let it be in the same area. However, I think most American males have a fondness for lever action rifles. And I have a fondness for lever action rifles. But in the 21st century, are they relevant at all? Besides for nostalgia. If you want one, if you've fallen into the Fox News marketing and think that you need a Henry lever action to support the Second Amendment and that makes you more American, whatever, that's fine. But are they relevant? Are they actually relevant? Are they actually a decent choice in the 21st century? If you strip the nostalgia away, are you left with anything useful? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. I'm going to forego the lengthy bio. Today, as we're talking about lever actions, I'll do really briefly. First and foremost, a Christian. That influences everything I do in this podcast. Is no different. If you don't like it, leave and go listen to something else. Also, military and law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion, lifelong hunter. Let's get into lever actions. Where do they fit in the 21st century? Well, here's the deal. They're not a modern battlefield weapon. They're just not. Right? No army in the world, no infantry, of which I was infantry in both the U.S. Marine Corps and the Army, no infantry in the world is going to take away everybody's semi-automatic or select fire, shoulder-fired weapons and give them lever actions. Right? They're not going to do that. They really haven't been relevant for a mainline battlefield weapon for over 100 years. World War I would say yes, they were still relevant and probably would have been arguably a better choice than many weapons that were fielded in World War I, because the war that they thought they were going to fight turned out to not be the actual war that was fought, which happens many times in war. But without massive digression, lever actions, I think, certainly would have been relevant and were used in World War I. And prior to that, they were a viable battlefield mainline infantry weapon. But they're not today. And don't try and pretend like they are. You're just kidding yourself. Can somebody that's a really good rifleman, and hopefully you're liked and subscribed, I'm working on an actual modern rifleman's qual / course of fire / training for you guys out there, the listeners, the tribe. I don't do this podcast primarily to help me. I do it to help you guys. So, upcoming, inbound, make sure you're liked and subscribed. I have what I would consider a modern, relevant, practical rifleman's course of fire. You could complete it with a lever action rifle. That doesn't mean it's as good as a frontline infantry weapon. Could somebody that's really skilled as a rifleman and really skilled at fieldcraft with a lever action rifle take out an opponent armed with an AR-15 or an AK-47? Sure, yeah, they certainly could. Or a SCAR 17, or pick whatever. Your Tavor if you're into bullpups. Could they prevail in a fight? Yes, the battle is the Lord's. David took out Goliath with a sling and a stone. But if we're comparing weapon to weapon, it's not as good. It's not a mainline infantry weapon. And if that offends you, I think you're so detached from reality that you're just emotionally attached to the lever action rifle. It's fine to have emotional attachments to things, but realize that they're emotional attachments and not based in reality. But there are other uses, right? Not everybody is a mainline infantryman. Not everybody is an 11 Bravo or an 0311 or an 03, well, in my case, 51. Not all situations are that. So I just wanted to get that out of the way in the beginning. They're not as good. They have less capacity. There are exceptions, but you're generally talking about, and realize when I talk about default, I'm talking about the classic lever actions we'll get into. I'm talking about, when I say lever action, that what comes to mind generally is a Winchester 94 and 30-30 or a Marlin 336 and 30-30. And there are other cartridges. There are big thumpers. There are more modern cartridges, and we'll talk about those. But kind of that default, they're not as good for that, for battlefield combat, let's call it, as an AR-15 or an AK-47 or heck, even an SKS, or my personal favorite, a Scar 17. They're not going to be as good for that. You get greater point blank range, you get greater capacity, you get greater cadence of fire, faster reloads. They're just not as good for that. But that's not the only reason we have guns, right? That's not the only reason we keep and bear arms. That's not the only reason to be well regulated. Are they still relevant for hunting? Which is something that I love to do. I was just blessed by God to have a very successful hunt, to be able to put meat on the table for the family for Thanksgiving, of which I am very thankful. Are they relevant for hunting? Absolutely. Absolutely. They're as good or better than a lot of the modern, ultra-hyped, and I would say less practical for hunting rifles that are trying to be sold today. For hunting, absolutely, they're still practical. Again, going back to those quintessential, the Winchester 94 30-30, absolutely practical. Absolutely, still a fantastic gun. The Marlin Model 336, probably, that's for most people for deer hunting. Actually, probably the Marlin 336 is a better option than the Winchester. You're talking about crossover or light handy or something like that. I actually enjoy the Winchester better, but for most people for deer hunting, I think the 336 actually is a better design. Just the actual engineering of it, I think, is a better design, especially because there's the ability to mount optics, and I'm not a Luddite. I think you should have and be able to use iron sights, but I won't disagree with the fact that optics can be a force multiplier, can enhance abilities. Anyway, either one of those is a fantastic hunting choice. They're a great deer hunting choice. The vast majority of deer that are taken inside 200 yards, and inside of 200 yards, they're absolutely fine. And I would say inside 150 yards, they really pose no disadvantage over any of the crazy, ultra-accurate, and in many cases ultra-heavy, over-magnified, and unwieldy bolt actions of today. In fact, I would say, I think if more hunters were still hunting with these Winchester 94s and Marlin 30-30s, they would probably have more success, not less, in the deer woods. They actually spent time learning field craft and tracking and stalking and spotting game and reading the landscape. And heck, just learning how to use the wind and walk quietly in the woods than spending a bunch of time and money on range finders and trying to shoot really tiny groups off a bench and many other things that they're not bad, but they're not what's most effective in taking game. They're absolutely still relevant and still awesome. Still fantastic. for deer hunting, for things like hog hunting. I said that I didn't think that the lever action rifle can go toe to toe. It's not as good as a mainline battlefield weapon, but there are many people hunting hogs with AR-15s, and I would say the inverse in this relationship. If you offered me, and I like AR-15s. I was just shooting AR-15s yesterday. I'm a big fan of them. I think every red-blooded American should own it or something like it. Whether it's a SCAR or you like AKs better, you should own something like it. But if you said you're going on a hog hunt in Texas, there's a rancher that needs help eradicating some of these filthy swine off their property, I would take, you're talking about like shooting out of a helicopter or something, you're talking about actually walking around the woods, I would take a lever action 30-30 or 35 Remington, which I really like, over an AR-15. I know the AR-15 is super popular for that, but I'm just telling you from my training and experience, and I have probably way more experience with an AR-15, I would rather take the lever action 30-30 or 35 Remington, and there's other cartridges too, that I would take because I think for that situation it's more effective. They're more handy in the woods, they handle better, I think they're better for the kind of shooting situations that I would encounter, the distances I would encounter, and round per round effectiveness is greater. If we're comparing it to a 223 AR-15. So absolutely they're still relevant. Another one I think common today is a protection long gun outside the home. And I almost called this a ranch rifle, and that's a real common name for it, but let's be real. Most of us don't live on ranches. I have been a ranch manager when I was a professional big game hunter and guide. Part of that was being the ranch manager. I managed a ranch. But most people in America don't live on ranches. So I'm going to call it defense outside the home. Defensive life outside the home. You know, home defense is a real common term, but what about outside the home? What about if you're not inside the home? Maybe you don't live on a ranch, but maybe you live rural. Maybe you have a fairly decent chunk of land. Maybe you have feral hogs or coyotes, or you live, I mean, it could happen anywhere where you get an intruder or an invader, but especially for our poor American citizens that live on the Mexican border. There's some nasty things going on there, and I've lived in Southern California. I was a cop in Southern California. I've lived in Arizona and New Mexico and Nevada. There can be quite a bit of activity down there that you don't even want to be a part of, but you are kind of subject to it, and you're in that world by very nature of where you live. Right? Drug cartel activity, illegal human trafficking activity, all those horrible things going on down there on our southern border. And maybe you don't even live on a ranch, or maybe you have to drive from where you live to where you work, and you might end up in some kind of situation where defense of life and liberty outside the home is a thing. Now I am not saying that a lever action is the best choice for this. I'm not even saying it would be my choice for this, because it wasn't. It isn't. Well, thankfully I live far away from there now. I am much closer to the Canadian border, actually. Pretty close to the Canadian border. But I will tell you right now, when it's like 20-something degrees out here and I'm out shooting, I do miss the sun of Arizona. But anyway, where was I? For this outside the home defense of life and liberty, the lever action would not be a bad choice. And depending on you and your situation, your criteria. I mean, a lever action has ridden in the back of many of a truck. In the back of many of a pickup truck. It is not a bad choice. It is not a bad choice at all. It is definitely a step up in firepower. You guys know I've done, well, if you're regular listeners, you know I've done the vast majority of my competition wins and my training in combat handgun, in modern practical handgun competitions. I actually started out with more precision type rifle, but I have done the vast majority with a handgun because I felt in that transition time that as an American who wants to be armed as much as I can be, which is pretty much all the time, with the exception of like maybe an airport or a courthouse or something, if I was going to get into a violent altercation to defend life and liberty, then I was probably going to be with a handgun. But if I can have a long gun, I want a long gun. And I would say a lever action is absolutely a big step up in firepower over a handgun. Are there certain situations that you would contrive where a handgun is a better choice? Yeah. But there is no doubt that for most situations, especially outside the home, and even inside the home, that a long gun, a rifle or a shotgun is a good option. And the lever action is not a bad option, right? They're often jokingly referred to, lovingly referred to, disparagingly referred to, whatever optic you want to look at that through, as a redneck assault rifle, right? They have a high rate of fire compared to many other firearms. A lever action 30-30, this is where I would choose a Winchester over the Marlin probably. But a lever action Winchester 94, yeah, it's not an AR-15, it's not an AK-47, but maybe you don't need an AR or an AK-47, or maybe it's not best for your scenario. It's absolutely a big step up in firepower. 30-30 is a much more effective round per round than 9mm, than 40 Smith & Wesson, than 45 ACP, even than you 10mm advocates out there. And it's a good round, but it's not anywhere near ballistically as equivalent to a 30-30. And a lot of people look at the 30-30 as like underpowered or somehow not good enough. I mean, if you compare it to like a 30-06, yeah, maybe it's underpowered compared to that. But you compare it to many, many other things, and it's absolutely a rock star compared to 9mm. And I love 9mm, but you're comparing apples to oranges. You're talking about a handgun round versus a rifle round, and a good intermediate rifle round. I would say, I've done a whole podcast on the 30-30, and I think I called the 30-30 America's first intermediate rifle round, and it's a good one. If you live in an area where you can legally take deer, like you have a damage stamp and you can take deer most of the year, and you have feral hogs, and you might live in an area where you might have, well, I guess anywhere you could, but where it's more likely that you might have a violent encounter outside the home, then yeah, lever action 30-30 is, again, not a bad choice. I'm not saying it's the best choice, but it's certainly not a bad choice, and it's certainly a big step up from only having your handgun. So yeah, they're still relevant for that, for sure. Now let's talk about why lever actions might be, despite the laws of physics, more relevant to some people because of malum prohibitum. Let me give you a brief aside lesson on morals and ethics and civics. There is malum and se, evil by nature, always evil. Why? Because God Almighty says that it's evil. Therefore, it's always evil because God doesn't change. You shall not commit adultery. Adultery is always evil. I don't care if you think it's okay. I don't care if you really, really want to. I don't care if you feel like it. I don't care if she wants to. I don't care if the other party involved is indifferent. It does not matter. It is evil. It is malum in se, because God says you shall not commit adultery. Period. End of sentence. Done. Like it or not. Malum in se. And then there is malum prohibitum. Something that is not evil by nature. It is banned because it is prohibited by civics, by the government that you are under. The thing in and of itself is not evil. Let's say that the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, and you drive 65 miles an hour, and then a week later they change the speed limit from 55 to 75 miles an hour. Same road, same conditions, same everything. You driving 65 miles an hour on both days, that's malum prohibitum. One time it's not cool, the other time it's totally kosher because of civics, because some government entity decreed it so. There are a vast array of firearms laws, and I know most of the listeners are here in the U.S., but not all. and this will apply more to the not all, but also to some stuck and trapped behind the California curtain. Come out of her, my people. I know, I can say I've been there. I had a good high-paying job there. Walked away from it. Not worth it. Anyway, if that's you, don't you pray about where you should be in life. But there are many Americans trapped behind the California curtain, yearning to breathe free. This is a good example of malum prohibitum. Because of legislation, not because of the laws of physics, they might be pushed back 100 years, literally 100 years in firearms technology. Or, let's go a different route and say you live somewhere where it's malum prohibitum in another place. Let's say you want to be that man where it is written, beware the man who carries only one gun. You want a go-to practical rifle for hunting, for defense, for whatever, and you're malum prohibitum. Let's say you live in Ohio. I know there's one of the patrons that is very active. He lives in Ohio. Maybe trapped behind the buck-eyed curtain. And they say that they decree thusly and henceforth that thou shalt only hunt with a straight-walled cartridge. Again, pushing you back 100 or more years in firearms technology. This may give you an appeal where you would start looking at something like a 360 Buckhammer, which is brand new, or a 4570, which is super old, well over 100 years old, in firearms technology. Why? Because of malum prohibitum. In these situations, the lever action may be more relevant due to malum prohibitum. Some places, like our Canadians, our old school British colonial compadres from days of yore, right, where they're limited, their semi-automatic, their ability to own semi-automatic rifles is severely limited. It's not none, but it's severely limited. But there's not, I'm not really aware of many rules governing lever actions. Lever actions have a pretty high rate of fire for a manually operated gun, so this might make a lever action more appealing. Now, perhaps for you it's a horse of a different color. Perhaps for you, you don't live in one of those areas. You live in a free America, but you have to travel for work. Maybe you have an AR, or more than one AR. Maybe you got a Scar 17, or a Galil, and that's your go-to fighting rifle. I'd say rock on. But you travel for work. You're a traveling sales representative or a traveling businessman. And you, through no fault of your own, sometimes your work takes you to places that are a little bit more infringy. But you still want a long gun. I'm not saying it's the best choice. I'm not saying it's the only choice. I'm not even saying it will be my choice. Most of you guys listening know what my choice is for many of these situations. But it's a good choice. I won't even say it's a good choice for this. Right? I'm not aware of anywhere in the country. Maybe there's places that restricts that you can't hunt with like a 30-30. But I'm not aware of anywhere that restricts your ability to own or have a 30-30. A lever action. Right? If they're going to let you have pretty much anything in most places, it's probably going to be a shotgun or a lever action, right? I'm not aware of any state that has banned lever action 30-30 Winchester Model 94 or a lever action Marlin 336. I'm not aware of that, period. So maybe you're in that category. You're a long haul trucker. Maybe you got that government G-ride and you travel for the government. And you're not going on super secure facilities where you can't be armed at all. But maybe you're in that category. And for that, absolutely a relevant firearm for today. How about for survival? If you listen for any length of time, you'll know that I'm big into survival preparedness. I don't apologize for that. There's often that debate, the one long gun for the end of the world, for the apocalypse, man. Now, Again, this is not my choice. This would not be my first choice, but it wouldn't be my last choice. It's not a bad choice, especially if you're a wheel gun guy, and I sometimes still carry a wheel gun, a revolver. It's not my go-to. I generally carry a full-size combat handgun, a Sig Sauer 226 or an M17 or something, maybe even a Beretta, but a full-size combat handgun. But sometimes, for whatever reason, I'll need to go uber small, uber light, and that for me is my very lightweight Scandium 11 point something ounce 357 Magnum revolver. Many people choose, because of environment or again malum prohibitum or whatever, to carry a revolver, or just they really like revolvers. We've thusly mostly talked about the 30-30, and we'll get into other types of lever actions in a latter part of this podcast. But an advantage we haven't talked about thus far is many of these are the old school PCCs, pistol caliber carbines, but not like the super cool Tactiguchi, it takes Glock mags kind of PCC. I'd say in many cases still older and still more practical PCC, like a 357 lever action, like a Marlin or a Winchester or others lever action 357 Magnum. And the 30-30 is a good cartridge, but if you look, actually do some research, because it's the same caliber, but if you look at the ballistics performance of some loads of 357 Magnum out of a carbine length barrel, 16 inches or longer, it's quite impressive. And you don't get two 30-30 performance, but you get a lot more than you get out of most pistol calibers, and a lot more than you get even out of the same caliber from a pistol. Unless you're really new to ballistics, I think you understand this, but the velocity printed on the box is not the actual velocity. So you get vastly different velocities in general, unless it's like a short barrel load or something, but even in those cases a lot of times, you get vastly greater velocities out of a carbine length barrel than you will out of a handgun length barrel. And force equals mass times velocity squared. So you get a lot, in some cases, a lot more power out of, let's say, a 357 Magnum or a 44 Magnum out of that rifle. And here's where we get back to the survival thing. And this was, I think, at least I've heard of it being a thing like in the Old West or in the frontier pioneer days. You have a handgun and a rifle in the same cartridge. Well, there's a myriad of options for that. My go-to for this, if I was doing this, would be 357. I think it is probably the most versatile center-fired, not shotgun cartridge, period. It's great for defense. It's great for hunting medium and even larger game. Anything from 110 grain bullet to 180 grain hard cast bullet. It's a fantastic option. So something like a lever action 357 Magnum, if you generally carry or you think your Apocalypse handgun is going to be, and it wouldn't be a bad choice, you know, a stainless steel 4-inch or 6-inch 357 Magnum, and your long gun to go with that is going to be a 357 Magnum lever action. Right? That, if that's you and you're well trained and well regulated on both weapons platforms, I'd say rock on, man. That's a solid plan. You got your Bible reading, your prayer life squared away. You got your rice and beans squared away. You got your medical squared away. You got your firearm situation well thought out. This is not a bad option. You get that benefit of that common cartridge for the handgun and the rifle. Also, a benefit, forgive this if you probably know this, but semi-autos, everyone that I'm aware of, depends on the power of the cartridge for the action to cycle properly. Now you can get like 115 grain up to 147 grain in like a 9mm, but they're all basically going to have about the same amount of power. You can get a little bit lighter, a little bit heavier, but for it to reliably unlock that system, move the slide back and move it forward without breaking it with too much power, so you need enough to do that, and you need not so much that you won't break it. You have pretty set parameters. With a manually operated firearm, like a revolver or a lever action, right, you don't have those parameters. as long as that bullet will safely exit that barrel, it could theoretically go out of the end of that barrel at 5 feet per second and tumble to the ground. And if you move that lever, that gun's still going to operate fine. Why is this relevant for survival? Well, because if you are making your own ammo and you have to reload with black powder, which you can make your own black powder, you can make your own primers, that it may not be as good a rate of fire as an AR-15 or high capacity, but if you can continue to make ammo long after everybody else cannot, and it still works, and you still have a repeatable firepower gun, where you're not front stuffing a musket, that's something to consider. Also, what if the ammo just is not as good in the future? What if you got to get what you can get? It's more likely to be more reliable in that type of system. Like, you're probably not going to function for very long trying to reload 223 with black powder. It's probably not going to work out too well in your direct impingement AR-15, right? So there's a big advantage for survival for the lever action. Some of these cartridges are so old in the lever action that they were designed for black powder, like a 4570 or 4590. So there are some, I wouldn't say totally unique to the lever action, but the lever action has some compelling aroma to it for that one long gun apocalypse gun. So I think they can still be relevant for a survival choice. Okay, so we're already past 30 minutes. Let's start talking about the different kinds of lever action. Again, mostly when I talk about it, the default that pops into my mind is the lever action Winchester Model 94, which stands for 1894. It's been chambered in many things over the years, but by far the most common is the 30-30 Winchester. It is a good, light, handy, fast-handling carbine with a decent rate of fire. No, it's not going to compete with a semi-auto, but it's a decent rate of fire. 30-30 is no slouch. Again, I think it's America's first intermediate cartridge. It is a great option for medium-sized game inside 150 yards. Or you can extrapolate that to other things like feral hogs. And certainly many an elk have been put in the freezer or hung up and jerkied or smoked with the 30-30. The big competitor, and has been for a long time, is the Marlin 336. Fantastic gun. It has some main advantages. I did a whole episode, it's been a long time ago, but I did a whole episode on the Winchester 94 versus the Marlin 336. But a big advantage of the Marlin, and I think a lot of this was just happenstance because these both came out long before optics were common. Yes, they existed. They existed back in muzzleloader days, but optics weren't common on a common man's rifle. But just by the nature of the solid steel receiver and a flat top upper, it's a lot easier to mount most modern optical sights on the Marlin 336. Not that you can't mount optics, and not that there weren't provisions made in different models of the Winchester, but it's just easier most of the time with the Marlin. Also, the Marlin can be easier to clean and disassemble. If you've ever thought about taking your Winchester 94 completely down to clean it, don't. That is my advice. You don't do that. Give it some kind of solvent bath that's safe for the wood, or pay a professional gunsmith, or just leave it dirty, because you might do more harm than good. Those things are put together like a Swiss watch, and unless you're a Swiss watchmaker or a professional gunsmith, don't take those apart. It's just a bad idea, I think. Maybe if you're really, really mechanically inclined, like if you routinely rebuild engines, then yeah, you could probably get that back apart and put it back together. But for most people, I would say don't even mess with it. Not worth it. At least for basic maintenance, beyond just a quick clean, I think there's some advantage to the Marlin in that aspect. Also, and I've heard this more than one place, that in really harsh environments like Alaska, people preferred back in the day, and maybe still do, the Marlin, because it's a closed action. It's less places for dirt and ice and things like that to get into. That being said, it's a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit less fast handling than the Winchester. So it's all about what you're looking for. But those are kind of your standard. Also, because obviously the patents on those are long since expired, I believe Mossberg makes a copy of the Winchester. Winchester still makes them. You can still get a Winchester Model 94. But Mossberg makes a little bit more affordable option. And there are many Italian companies that make, I think, replicas of those. And then the Henry, or at least the company that bought the old name of Henry lever actions, kind of, if you look at them, they look suspiciously like a Marlin. So there you go. You can still get a brand new Marlin. Thankfully, Ruger bought those up recently, and they seem to be doing a very fine job of remaking those fine firearms. But those are kind of your default. Let's talk about what else. And I'm not going to cover every single lever action, right? I'm not really going to talk about, other than mentioning it here, about obscure lever actions, right? Like a Winchester Model 1895 and 405 Winchester. Or the Russians, the Comrade lever action, the Winchester 1895 and 7.62 by 54 rimmed. I'm talking about common ones. Right, so a big common one we touched on was the pistol caliber carbine. In general, you're going to get pretty high capacity. You're going to get greater ballistic performance out of those cartridges than you would out of the same cartridge out of a handgun. And there's some very common calibers. Again, my go-to for this would probably be 357, but there's also 44 Magnum. Obviously more powerful, but 44 Magnum, and both of these will shoot the special version. So 357 Magnum lever actions will shoot 38 specials, and 44 Magnums will shoot 44 specials. That gives you some versatility there. Also a real common one, and one that I had and don't have anymore and kind of saddens me, 45 Long Colt. Now, the original 45 Long Colt loading was good, and it has a reputation. In fact, it's kind of what we copied and looked at for good ballistics performance to get a 45 ACP. But in good modern guns and some of these lever actions and many revolvers, you can really hot load, like a Ruger Blackhawk or a Thompson Center. You can really hot load 45 Long Colt to make it almost completely different than its original ancestor. So 45 Long Colt is also real common. Any of these are a real good option for the OG PCCs, the like old school pistol caliber carbines. You look at, the ballistics of a 44 Magnum out of a carbine, and it's nasty. I mean, you could argue that a 44 Magnum handgun will pretty much take anything in North America for sure, and a 44 carbine is just giving you more ballistics performance. Now, you have to understand ballistics because many of the handgun projectiles, their construction is to give you good balance of expansion and penetration out of a handgun and handgun velocities. So you really have to look at that. Like some loads that would be absolutely great in a 357 Magnum for personal defense out of a handgun would not be good choices for hunting out of a lever action. But as long as you know that, you can really get some good performance. And especially talking about the 44 Magnum out of a long gun, it's a good ballistic performer. Especially if you live in an area where who cares if it's not as good at 300 yards, because you never can even see 300 yards. Right, all your hunting is done inside 100 yards. A 44 Magnum or 357 Magnum is fantastic for that. So there's some real advantage there. Also, if you're just like, you want to keep it simple and have a few cartridges, 22 long rifle, 12 gauge, and X, 44 Magnum or 357 Magnum. It's a good choice. Winchester and Marlin, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, they make versions of these. Forgive me, I don't remember the Marlin, but the Winchester is the 1892, I believe. So the 92s are a little bit smaller, a little bit handier. Also the Trapper models, that's what I had, was a 45 Long Colt Trapper model. I don't have it anymore. But what a beautiful, fantastic, practical gun for a lot of things. But yeah, you got the pistol calibers, and then there are a few really, really good options if you want a full-powered modern, and by modern I mean metallic cartridge, Spitzer bullet, meaning a pointed bullet, full-powered rifle cartridge, such as but not limited to 308, 30-06, and If you don't know, most of these lever actions we talked about thus far are tube feed magazines. Tube feeds have advantages and disadvantages, but they have a major disadvantage with modern rifle cartridges because it is possible, if you look at how they're designed, that the point of one bullet may impact the primer of another cartridge when stacked inside a tube. Therefore, to fire safely the modern Spitzer bullets, you're going to have to move to a box magazine. Now, this is good because for a lot of modern application, you might want a box magazine anyway. So in that case, these are going to have box magazines. The only one I'm going to recommend is the Browning BLR. I know Henry makes one, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But the Browning BLR, fantastic gun. If you want a beautiful lever action, I do mean beautiful. They are exquisitely built and looking guns, like a gun that would be a great gun to hand down to future generations, but in a modern cartridge. The Browning BLR, Browning Lever Action Rifle, fantastic. Not only are they available in common cartridges like 308, 30-06, also 243, one of my all-time favorite deer hunting cartridges. If you want to get crazy in the magnums, right, you can get it in 300 Win Mag or 338 Win Mag, I do believe. Right, so maybe you're in Alaska or, Alberta, where grizzly bears, coastal brown bears are a thing. Or maybe the opposite of that is true. You want a light, fast cartridge. You want a lever action, but you're in the Southwest and you hunt a lot of pronghorn. And you do see and can shoot routinely past, 200 yards. And you still want a lever action. They're a good choice. Also, they make a really cool gun, and I actually almost got one for the Alaska rifle. I decided on something else. But talk about this, wrapping it up into like the survival gun thing as well. They make a fairly light and handy that takes a modern cartridge lever action rifle that takes down. And unless you're talking about some really high-end bolt action, there's really not any common full-powered rifles that take down like this, where you can basically disassemble it quickly and put it in a pack or a bag. So if you go back to that truck gun thing, and one of your criteria is it has to fit under a seat or something like it, they make the BLR takedown. Still fires a full-powered rifle cartridge. You could have let's just pick 308. You could have a 308, decent rate of fire, 50 state legal, gun that takes down and stows handily in a small package. A package that somebody would not have any idea that there was a rifle in. And that's a pretty compelling option. Also, if you want more power but you don't care about the range, there is the 4570. If you're a hand loader, it's fantastic. It can be very fun to hand load for cartridges like this. It's straight walled, so there's less steps if you're not familiar with reloading. But again, it's a black powder cartridge, so if you want to make your own black powder or just reload with black powder because it's fun, you can go from very mild to wild and crazy. You can, if you have don't do it with an old trapdoor, an old Springfield trapdoor, right? But if you have a modern, good steel constructed firearm, you can load 4570 really hot so that it's a 4570 in name only compared to the original cartridge. Like the ballistics are completely different. If you want a lot of power but you don't care about the range, and I know they can be shot and they can be accurate at very long ranges, but they're at a major disadvantage over modern cartridges. But if you want the more power but you don't care about the more range, somewhere like British Columbia where brown bears are a thing, but it's real thick, dense most of the time, you're going out to pick berries, you want a good defensive option, something like that, right? The 4570, it's a storied, legendary cartridge, and it's still going, and it's still available. In fact, when Marlin got bought by Ruger, I may have misspoke earlier. If I did, forgive me. When Marlin got bought up by Ruger from Remington, so now they're owned by Ruger, I believe the first gun they came back out with was a beautiful stainless steel lever action in 4570. That says something. The American people, they love lever actions and they love 45-70. So, if you want that more power and that those ballistics appeal to you, then that is an option as well. And they're not the only options in lever actions. We didn't even talk about lever action rimfires. And this is an area where I will recommend Henry. Their lever action rimfires. But if you think your one long gun for the apocalypse is going to be a 22, and many people choose the 22 for a lot of reasons. But unlike a semi-auto, again, that requires the power of the cartridge itself to cycle, like a 1022 can be super reliable with 22 long rifle. But if you want to shoot quiet and you don't want a suppressor, the totally legally, totally without a tax stamp, no government breaking of regulation here, no breaking of malum prohibitum, but they're stamped right on the side, I do believe, shorts, longs, and long rifles. If you shoot a 22 short out of a full-length barrel, it can be quite, well, let's just call it a library cartridge. It can be very quiet. It can be very quiet, period. There's also Calibris and CB caps, which are quieter still. Much quieter than many guns with a suppressor. Also, I'll briefly mention, and I talked about this on a whole episode, quiet without a suppressor. Since the lever action is manually cycled, you can hand load heavy weight for caliber, low velocity rounds for many of these cartridges. Like a 44 special with a very heavy, like 300 and something grain bullet at a very low velocity, so that most of the pressure is gone by the time it leaves the barrel, and they can be remarkably effective and quiet and not breaking any legislation. Same could be said with a 38 special. So, yeah, that's a thing. And I guess this is a long episode, a lot longer than I thought. But I guess there's a lot to lever actions. Are they still relevant? Or are they a tactical dodo bird? I guess in summation, they're not a battlefield weapon, right? They're not a modern relevant battlefield weapon. I don't think any army is about to take away HK-416s or the SIG M7 and 227 Fury and issue lever actions. No. But there's a lot more to guns than that. Guns are tools. Guns are art. Guns are part of our heritage. And I think absolutely lever actions can have a modern relevant role in certain niche applications. Anyway, with that, the tactical tip of the day. This one, for lever actions, I mentioned the disassembly and the cleaning. Just don't completely take them apart unless you really know what you're doing. You always want to, if you can, I shouldn't say, most of the time you want to clean a rifle barrel in the direction that the bullet travels, meaning you want to clean it from the back to the front. This can present a problem for many lever actions, for obvious reasons, because you can't do that unless you have a bore snake. That's my number one recommendation. Just get a bore snake. It's the quickest, easiest option. If you do need to clean it with a traditional cleaning rod from the front, they make cleaning rods, one that are coated and two that have a little crown guide. It looks like a little movable part on the cleaning rod that just appears like a cone that you can actually hold on the crown so that the cleaning rod does not contact the crown. The crown is the part that the bullet exits, and this is very, very important for accuracy. When that bullet exits, you want it to be as perfect concentricity as possible, meaning all the lands and the grooves and the cuts in the rifling are pristine. If you damage those, then that can allow gas to escape and cause uneven friction on the bullet. One of the keys to the beautiful symphony that is rifle accuracy is consistency. You really want to protect the crown of that rifle. So if you are going to clean your lever action, my number one recommendation is get a bore snake. My number two recommendation is get one of those cleaning rods with the crown guide built into it. Don't destroy $1,000 or plus lever action rifle because you got the cheapest 3-piece aluminum cleaning rod at Walmart. Probably better off never cleaning it. But that's the tactical tip of the day. Either the bore snake for those or a good cleaning rod with a crown guide on it. Your tactical verse of the day. Hopefully what you care about more than lever action rifles. For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. What a beautiful, beautiful verse. For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. God doesn't love you because you're good. God loves you because He is good. God didn't create you because of anything in you, but because of His own divine, loving nature. It's the main, I think, trick and deception of, well, I guess human history, but to think that it's about you, it's focused on you, it's your life is about you, this thing is about you. It's not about you. It's about God. The Bible is not about you. It's about God. It's not a story of you. It's a story of God. God uses us. Not because He needs us, but because He loves us and He wants us to be a part of His story. It's a beautiful, beautiful gift. Every breath is a gift from God. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.